I'm very honored, very pleased to have you here. I of course prepared the event and read about your biography and what you did, and it would of course take me almost the whole panel to refer everything that you have done. But basically, you have been in the sustainability arena for a very long time. You have written very famous books. You are told to be the author of the so-called triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit, which you recalled later. This is maybe something you also want to explain to the audience, how you recall it, or how you would actually frame it now if you wrote the same book again. You have worked with hundreds of companies on the boards, and as a consultant, you have started your own companies. From what I hear, there are still all of them in existence. And I'm extremely honored. You have written the last book called Green Swans, which is the name-giving title of this panel. Green Swans being events that, in three words translated, positive events. In contrast to Black Swans, which mark a turnaround towards a better world and a sustainable and balanced world. But maybe that is too freely translated, so please feel free also to adjust that. And the panel will be how we can make that happen. When I read your book, it felt very much to me that you feel that we're at the crossroads, and not only that we don't have much time, but that we really have two roads ahead of us, and one will be the one of collapse and disaster, the Black Swan road, and one will be of balance and a thriving world in harmony with nature, where we can actually benefit from all the technologies and all the great inventions that we have made as human beings, and really put all our talents to use for a better world that we are dreaming of, and that we now have to make sure that we do everything we can to make the good world make it. And that's what we're going to discuss. We've had already very good discussions today on climate communication, on how we can drive politics, on how we can connect. We've had this workshop I told you about with the Decade of Action, shared a bit about what planet groups do. We've not talked about money yet, and I think that is a crucial element of that transition. So while we're still waiting for Mariana, I would love you to introduce yourselves. What are you doing now? What is the core of your work? I'm so honored that you attend panels like ours. So you are still very open, active, looking around how you can help to get those green swans into existence. So please do share a little bit about your current situation, why you're here, and what your heart is calling for at the moment.
I'm very happy to do that, Tim, and thank you for the invitation. I should just, as I did earlier to you, just apologize to your audience. I had eye surgery on Friday of last week, so my eye is still very peculiar. So when all of those hearts and so on were coming up early on, those sort of emoticons, I thought I was hallucinating again. So if every so often I look a bit peculiar, it's just because that's lovely, more of them. So I'm not hallucinating. So to your question, Tim, we're doing a lot of things. I mean, Volans is a very small organization. If it's a good day in the middle of lockdown, there are 10 people working in the office. That's a miracle. So we're very small. We work very close in with the leadership teams of businesses. Is this Mariana? It is.
Now is Mariana coming? So let's have a second, because she has to also turn off the sound. Mariana, can you turn off the sound on the main stage? Mariana, can you turn off the sound on the main stage? Mariana, can you turn off the sound on the main? Yes.
I love the glasses. They're better than either of the rest of us are using. Lovely to see you, Mariana.
Thank you to have you here, Mariana. It took some detours, but you're on stage. We have not started long ago. A few minutes. I've introduced John, asked him to share with us what he's up to at the moment. So let's have him complete this, and then I will introduce you, and so you have a bit of time to get adjusted to the panel. Great to have you here. So, John, first of all, maybe what are you currently up to? You mentioned Volans, and your
Yeah,
work.
well, I'm very much looking forward to probably meeting you, Mariana, and hearing what you're up to as well. But just to answer the question, I was saying that we work with a small number of major companies very close in over extended periods of time. So at the moment, we're working, for example, in Finland with Neste, in Switzerland with Novartis, in Spain with Acciona, and so on, different companies. And basically what we're trying to do is not simply corporate social responsibility, although that is important. We're saying this is a moment where we all have to transform the way we think and what we do. And so we're working with these companies because we believe in one way or another, they're really they have a crucial role to play in what comes next, but they have to sort of transform the way they operate in the meantime. One other thing that's fairly important for us is that since the book Green Swans came out in April of last year, in the first year after that, I did over 150 virtual keynotes in over 35 countries, and that led to a huge amount of interest, firstly, but secondly, people kept asking us the same question, which is, all right, I mean, we get the message, we understand that the regenerative economy is out there and it is important, but what do we do? I mean, we're in this sector, we're in this geography, these are our challenges, our opportunities. Do you have case studies that address that? So the second piece is we've set up a Green Swans Observatory, and we're scanning a number of major sectors. So cities, because that's largely where we now live as a species, electricity, because that's what powers our cities and urban economies, the whole sort of water, soils, farming, food, nutrition and health, that whole nexus, and then finance, the world of money, because that's absolutely critical. And we're doing what we call living case studies. So we're not just simply going in to a successful company saying, this is how they say they became successful, and then we'll teach that to the world. We're saying we're going to watch organizations as they try to transform, and all sorts of other things will happen along the way. And so we're trying to give a window, at least a partial window, into some of these organizations in transformation. So I'll stop there. But
good. Will be really interesting to hear from you in the second part of the panel, how also the companies in the audience, how they can tap into that pool of experiences and either contribute if they have a success story to share, or benefit from it, from what others are doing. Okay, but now let me introduce Dr. Mariana Bozesan. Very happy to have you here, Mariana. Sorry for the short delay. Also really excited to have you here. You are renowned, scientist, can I say that? Artificial intelligence specialist. So you have an expertise, a subject matter expertise. You are also an entrepreneur. You have founded several companies. You are also an investor, an impact investor. You have been acclaimed a number of times, angel investor, female investor of the year by different panels. You have developed a scheme of investing called, conscious investing. You are very much influenced by Ken Wilber and spiral dynamics. You have written a book, From Profit to Prosperity, and I'm really, really happy to have you here as a co-panelist with John. And maybe also for you, that first question: what are you up to currently? What is driving your heart? What is having most of your intention and energy right now, or these days?
I'm sorry for being, as a computer scientist and artificial intelligence major, having such a hard time joining. And now you're hearing me double, right?
Yes.
And I have no way. This is the first time that I'm using this tool. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, hear you very well.
We hear you clearly.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is the first time that I'm using this tool. I thought it would be a Zoom call, and I didn't browse before. So, hey, welcome to the 21st century and to exponentially growing technologies, which is basically exactly what my heart and meaning is, trying to help young entrepreneurs get the necessary capital to tell us older people who don't get it, what the future looks like, and invite them into the conversation of emergence, because we all need to become very, very humble. Those of us in power right now, not that I am in power, but the power to be what the future really looks like in the future. So this is what I'm all about, helping young entrepreneurs get the capital that is currently, unfortunately, not flowing to you young people because of the stupid systems that we have in place. And so here I am trying to influence as much as I can those who get the funds from the stimulus packages and don't know what is needed in order to better de-risk their investment criteria, in order to give the young people the capital that is needed to show us where we need to go. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm curious to hear what the audience wants to know in terms of the answers, the questions they have, and how we could support them better.
Thank you, Mariana. Great introduction. Yes, we have the chat open. Any question you would like to address to John and Mariana, put it in the chat. I try to scan it and take it and address it to those two. We've had a panel on climate communication. We've had a panel on how do we drive politics. There was a question, okay, how do we put money behind it? Because that's what's driving it, right? When we talk about politics, we talked about lobbyists, and we talked about how unfair it is, and how many resources and access the fossil fuel industries has, and the agrochemical industry, and all of that, which the sustainable companies do usually not have. How can we get money behind the transition? Maybe Mariana, you answer first, and then John.
Well, the first thing that we need to change is how the money is being distributed and how we measure success right now. And the sole measurement for success is for profit only. So as long as we measure success and distribute money with the only measurement criteria being for profit only, at the expense of people and the planet, which is the only system, the only way how our economics and financials and businesses work, nothing will change. So this is the first thing that we need to change, is as long as you receive, at the end of the month, now we're in the digitalization era, a statement from your bank that has at the lower bottom right side, a number without any indication how they invested your money, how many children they have educated, how many people they have lifted out of poverty, how many women they have employed, and this is a confirmation that the systems we have in place are wrong. And there is a movement, financing sustainable growth, for instance, within the European community, trying to change that by adding European environmental social governance criteria. And of course, everyone in the financial system now in Europe and in many country levels are trying to adapt to the SFDR system, but nobody really knows how to do it. So, and I hope that, John, you are a leading force in this field, and, we're doing what we can in order to help get the money to where it is needed, not to the old banks and not to the old companies who lied to us, the manufacturing industry and so on, and who are basically responsible for the disasters that we're in, the planetary emergency that we're in, but those who are actually now about to change it, and the system doesn't get it. And it empowers those who should, who should be empowered. So we need to become much, much more active, outspoken, and we know how to do a better job. I mean, John, you've done it. We've shown for the many, many decades, ever since the impact investing, for instance, has been born in the early 80s in Canada. but we don't listen. If you look at the numbers, in terms of the investments of impact investors, the assets under management, I don't know. Last time I looked, it was about around 1% of all assets under management. Give me a break. So this needs to change, and we need to get to the streets to get the attention of those to change it. I'm sorry, but I think at this point, I wrote academically and non-academically, bringing numbers to the field to show that you actually are saving your money. You're de-risking better if you take the people and the planet into consideration in your de-risking criteria. But it's, they don't want to listen because they're not motivated. So we need to motivate them.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm a rebel. I'm 63 years old. I'm not young in my body, but at heart. And that's the way, because we know how to do and what to do, but we don't do what we know. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mariana. Actually, I forgot in the introduction, you're also a well-known and an outspoken member of the Club of Rome community, where you're also addressing that. Before I give it to John, in 40 minutes, we have a panel on carbon accounting and impact measuring, which I think is very much in line with what you just said. One of the three panelists will be a consultancy, right, based on science. They have developed a system how you can tell for every company what climate trajectory they're on. So they can assess, okay, you are 3 degrees, you are 4 degrees, you're actually 1 degree. If every company behaved like you, we accelerate the deterioration of the planet. And I think that is a very important element in making it very easily visible what each company is contributing or not to the solution or the destruction. John, what is your take? How can we bring money behind the solution?
Well, the first thing to say, Tim, is I love both what Mariana has been saying and the style in which she says it, the sort of passion and ambition there. I'm 72, so a lot older. And I find the older that I get, the more I want to break things. Most people go in the opposite direction. And but I'm going to be a little bit optimistic in the sense that, firstly, I don't think we can ignore old money and the old financial institutions and so on. We have to also change them, because otherwise this is just not going to move fast enough. One of the things that we're doing at Volans is it's an initiative with our House of Commons, our UK Parliament, and it's called Bankers for Net Zero. And we're basically trying to get retail bankers to the point where they recognize not only that net zero is important for their own operations, but they start to bankroll what smaller and medium-sized enterprises are doing in this space. So I think we've got to focus on the older money. We also see some of these institutions like BlackRock. I mean, Larry Fink, the CEO, has been saying for years now in his annual letter, he's been recognizing that there is a profound systemic challenge. That's new. And I just want to make the point that there are many people now in the financial world, which has largely been insulated from a lot of this stuff. Yes, they've had socially responsible investment and in ethical investment funds. I mean, for 25, 30 years now, I've been successfully on advisory boards of SRI funds. But about 18 months ago, we have a private pension because I've been self-employed for decades. We went through the process of having an independent person come and look at our pension policy, which we thought we had screened effectively. And we found within 1 or 2 degrees of separation, we were into the fossil fuels industry in a quite powerful way. And what shocked me was how long it took us to sell off those stocks and move into more of the right stuff, if I can use that phrase. So we've got to focus on the older institutions in the space, because otherwise they're simply going to block a lot of this happening. You've now got this stranded assets debate where increasingly the big holders of money are suddenly recognizing that they're invested in industries that increasingly don't have a future. And if you go into the Exxon Mobils, if you go into the coal industry, you find people are actually existentially nervous now. Does that mean that they stop fighting? No, they actually fight even more desperately to cling on to what they have. We just saw the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison talking about, we're going to do coal in perpetuity. Well, no, they're not, and it's going to end for them much, much sooner than they might imagine. Just a final point. I think there's a younger generation coming up in every sector. I think it's happening in the financial sector as well. And one of the things that we're seeing is financial analysts beginning to ask mainstream companies much more penetrating questions about climate and about circularity and about sustainability and all of these good things. So I think it's beginning, but I think back to the point about impact investment, I think last time I looked, it's $800 billion invest in that, but that's almost a rounding error in the system as a whole. We have a hell of a journey ahead of us, and we've got to do it in very, very short order. I mean, within the decade, really. And at some levels, that looks impossible, but it can't be impossible. It's got to be not only possible, but we've got to make it inevitable. And I think that's still doable.
Great. And
well, another thing that if I may add something, there are several things. So we need the legislation also, which needs to come in place. Totally. So for once, I said what is wrong with the system, which is wrong, and it doesn't change fast enough. We have slowly but surely come up with this ESG, Financing Sustainable Growth Initiative. What's actually not happening is the legislation, the regulators. I am an investor. I have invested for the past 30 years. I have developed a model that shows in early stage that you can actually bring in more money, multiple, in my case, of 6.8 multiple. I'm an investor. I know what I'm talking about, not only a serial entrepreneur. You make more money by adding additional de-risking criteria, social and environmental, to the traditional due diligence. But if you look at where the money is they are mandated by regulators to invest 5% of their total assets, like pension funds and institutional investors, where the big money is, 5% in private equity, and venture capital is only, they mostly go into infrastructure, private equity investments. In venture capital, this is where the young people come in, the new industry, the innovators. It's less than, it's very, very tiny little proportion of that. So the capital doesn't, and I'm talking here about Europe after having lived in Silicon Valley on and off for 30 years, in Europe, we don't have that. So the regulators, the legislation is not in place to really encourage the money to go to the young people, to the young entrepreneurs, who, by the way, talking about numbers, small and medium enterprises, do you know for how much in terms of business they're responsible? It's 90%. Yeah. Do you know that these small and medium enterprises are responsible for more than between 50 and 75% of the GDP? So it's not small, but we don't get the support by the government, by the regulators, by all of those. So if you think that I am angry, well, I am passionate. I don't think I am angry. I'm here to support, but I'm also here to really encourage those who, institutional investors, private equity funds, to really invest and use the model that I developed in early stage to de-risk. Everything is in place. We just need the courage. I mean, if you don't hate your children and your great-children, and you're managing an institutional fund, a private equity fund, large money, well, you better do something about it right now. I mean, and maybe risk, because of the current regulation and legislation, to lose your job. But so what? We're going to save our planet. We only have 10 years to set ourselves up to ensure the future of life.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we come back to that model, what can the people in the audience do? If you are not an investor, so you don't have money to give, if you're not a regulator, if you're a normal person working in a normal company, what can we do to accelerate the change?
Shall I have a go? I mean, I think I would sort of initially suggest 3 things, and they're all very simple. And the first one is to learn about the science that underlies so many of these issues, because if you're simply doing this on an emotional basis, a missionary basis, and you don't know the facts, you're not going to be terribly effective. And this is talking about people who largely work for other people and therefore in organizations of one sort or another. The second thing I would say is be very careful to avoid the missionary approach. Instead, ask questions. Use questions to drive thinking in people who are a lot more powerful and influential than you. And it's something I only learned through decades of working in boardrooms and C-suites, that if you ask questions, you really force people to think. Whereas if you tell them stuff and you said, you should be doing this, people's buffers, hackles go up quite quickly. Mm-hmm. The third thing is join forces. We're all much more influential if we can develop some degree of critical mass. Now that can be real critical mass, or it can be apparent critical mass. And I say that because I think, for example, your planet groups are really an important part of this, Tim. But one of the things I've done over time is I've been very careful in boardrooms to say, I do not represent the sustainability field, circularity, human rights, the anti-bribery and corruption movement. If you want to know what those people think, I can help you pull them in, or we can help you pull them in, but you should talk to them directly. Now, that used to be the model where you'd actually get the external stakeholders, back in the day, Oxfam, Greenpeace, whatever, Amnesty, in to talk to your senior management. Now the thing is to get the senior management out into the wider world. It's complicated by lockdowns and all the rest of it, but they've got to get out. They've got to see with their own eyes what's already happening in terms of future realities. And when people see it with their own eyes, they experience it. Very often that really leads to sort of transformative exercises. So planet groups are really essential on the inside, but let's get these senior people out into the wider world and wake them up.
Thanks, John. Very good. Mariana, what would you like to add to that?
I couldn't agree more. And this is why I spent, John, you know how difficult writing is. It really, particularly if you're using, academic, an academic style, which is that's the only way how I write.
I avoid that like the plague, Mariana, but I respect those who do it.
That's my contribution to what you just said. It's extremely important to use the language of those that you're speaking to and not your own. Yeah. And so that to invite them to feel comfortable and see the benefit that they have. So one of the biggest issues in why we're not changing is de-risking. So these people, institutional investors, people who manage these huge funds, they're not bad people. They're just protecting themselves, because if they don't obey the rule, which is wrong, as I said, for profit only as the only measurement criterion, they go to prison. And so that's the system itself is wrong. And so that's why I'm so in helping these extraordinary people who do care. And I couldn't agree more with John. We need to really build a bridge between where they are and where they know they have to go and they want to go, the better. So I've spent the better part of my last 30 years as an investor in building that bridge from an early stage perspective, investing and company building. And so another thing that I think is extremely important is the technology, and which helps make that transition. We cannot make a transition toward a safe planetary boundary, because we left the safe planetary boundary toward go back to ensuring the future of life without technology. And of course, that makes the entire investment and the entire system much, much more complicated, because technology evolves exponentially. And I had prepared a presentation to show you what I mean, but since we're not using Zoom, so I'll have to speak to it rather than share the presentation with it, how do we really begin to understand, speaking the same language, how do we help people understand exponential growth? Most people do not understand that. And, I would like to invite everyone listening to think about going to the next party and asking people at the party, what would they rather do? Get $1 a day for the next 30 days, or 1 penny a day, which is doubled every day. And you would be surprised as to what the answer is.
Mm-hmm.
In the first case, it would be, of course, $30. And in the second case, it would be, that's exponential growth, right? Is what? Think about it. It's 10 million.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the same thing. If you fold a piece of paper 50 times, where do you get? How far do you get?
To the moon and back, or so.
To the sun. It's actually harder. So, and this is exactly the difficulty that we're dealing with, because we're coming from a world where we could easily handle complicated things. We know how to do surgery. We know how to build a car. We know how to fly to the moon. These are very complicated things. We're experts in that. But within the planetary emergency that we're facing right now, we're dealing with complex things, which is exponential. And so that the solutions as to what the systems look like have to evolve. So those of us and people like you coming up with these conferences are extremely instrumental and important in bringing the knowledge together so that we are in a position to address the issues that we have. So that's really, really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. I've been talking to John about the study by Rethink's a consultancy called Rethink Climate Action. That's about exponential growth, how it could affect actually climate solutions if we stopped supporting and subsidizing the incumbent industries. It's on our website on the resources page.
Yes, it's Rethink X, just in case anyone goes looking. But,
really powerful study. You mentioned, John, asking the right questions can help to break up these old mindsets and these old frames. And there's this question in the chat, and I like that question a lot. Can you give us examples of how we can sit in a boardroom, in a strategy meeting, in a business development workshop, and by asking good questions, actually make people, make new horizons come up?
It's funny because something alongside the science and the questioning, which I've learned over time, is to use very carefully, but to use humor. And I don't mean telling jokes. I mean being just slightly playful with powerful people. And there was a moment in 2005 when Walmart had been very hard hit by Hurricane Katrina. They lost something like 100 stores overnight. And they put huge pressure, Lee Scott, their then CEO, put huge pressure through their supply chains. And two of their critical suppliers, both of them excellent companies in terms of safety, health, and environment, asked me to speak to their boards in the space of 2 or 3 months after that. And one was DuPont, the chemical company, and the other one was 3M. And I flew to Minnesota in the days when one flew and did a session with the board of 3M. And afterwards, a woman came up who was part of the board. She was originally a psychologist. And she said, "Why do you use humor in boardrooms like this?" And I said, "Well, it's something that has evolved. I can't remember a joke to save my life. But I've learned how to play off what people say in the moment. And that's why I think it's sometimes quite dangerous." And she said, it's interesting because as a psychologist, she said it works. And it works, having watched me, she said it works for 2 reasons. The first one is that you are signaling that you're not a complete missionary. You're not there to prove them all wrong, and that's your sole purpose. You're playful even with your own agenda, and that relaxes people. And then she said, you play with them. And normally that never happens in that. I mean, peer-to-peer, it may happen occasionally, but quietly on the margins. But you're doing something quite different there. And I said earlier on, apparent critical mass. She said, when you do that, if you do it successfully, you're signaling in these people's reptilian brains, you have much more power than they had assumed. They thought you were there as a consultant or whatever. But if he can say that, he must have a huge army behind them, is the way she put it. So I'm not arguing for humor all the time, and these aren't laughing matters in many ways, but we've got to have the confidence that we will make this work, that there are lots of other people out there doing great work, and we're sort of part of that much wider movement, and bring that self of confidence and project that into the future in a way that these people think, wow, why wouldn't you be part of this? So there's an initial thought.
I'll relate that also to the politicians and the debate we had earlier on how to drive politics, and then bring it into the power game of politics.
Yeah.
Mariana, what is your perception?
Yes, I would like to go back to your original question in terms of what if I have an idea and I want to start a company, and there's, my friend and I and a dog and a PowerPoint, which is the world that, it's Silicon Valley. That's how it all works. And that's how they become, turned into unicorns. Mm-hmm. I think it is extremely important to really be aware of the fact that you have to be able to cover your basis better than anyone else. So the traditional, I have these 5 steps in which I do an assessment of a potential investment. The first one is the traditional due diligence, the financial. You have to be extremely good to know your market, like John said. You know what you're doing. You are professional. You cannot expect, and I'm encouraging women entrepreneurs to do this job, because what I see right now, particularly in Germany, is that women sometimes are not as well prepared as men, which makes me really sad. But you have to be really, really extraordinary when you come and ask for money in a transformational with a transformational idea that integrates people, planet, profit. And I usually use the 6 P's, which is parity, equality of people, planet, profit criteria with passion and purpose, because you have to also love what you're doing. And this needs to shine through. Love. And not only contribution, but you have to be very professional. You have to be able to speak the language of the financial world and of the business world, and to know how your business is going to be successful, financially successful. It's financial sustainability is just as important as the social sustainability, the planetary, and so on. And of course, your own. You have to be able to survive and thrive in this on this journey in building a company. It's not an easy one, but it's one that I personally love. So the second step is you need to identify very clearly and make it very obvious to your investor how you address the environmental, social governance criteria that, in terms of sustainability. You have to know how to do that and build the bridge for them, as John recommended, so that they are, willing and eager actually to invest in you. And then the other 2 steps, step number 3 is you have to make sure that you are coherent with yourself, that you know what you're doing, that you love what you're doing, that you know your stuff, and that you have the ability to build a team, which is step 4, that is going to succeed not only financially in building a successful company financially, but in integrated way, the 6 P's. So these are extremely important steps, and I've written extensively. You can go to ResearchGate or other, buy my book to find ways on how to do that. In a successful way. And that's how we build a successful bridge, as John said, between the powers to be and the sustainability factors in saving our planet.
Right. And what's stage 4 and 5, Mariana? I know that.
Say it again?
What is stage 4 and 5 of your due diligence?
The step 4 is the team building. This is so we're looking for how successful the team is. I mean, if you invest money at some point, particularly high risk, you need to make sure that this team is able to to implement and to deliver. And it's not about them being ready and done and now, but the willingness to grow along with the business and to grow as a human being, as an integrated person, and enjoy what you're doing while you're trying to change the world with your company has to be there. And step 5 is, of course, our decision, are we going to invest or not, based on these previous criteria.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And we also share some links when we, debrief on the event, so people can do more reading. I've also seen some YouTube videos where you go in more depth in explaining that. I find it very, very inspiring and powerful. And also because you relate closely to, the level of consciousness that the leadership has achieved. And
which is basically ties into what John just said, using humor. Of course, once we laugh, we're just happy, and everything seems to happen more naturally and more easily. So thank you, John, for that.
Yeah. You know that this Planet Day marks the launch of our crowd investing campaign. And I have to say that now, because you can become a Planet Group's investor. You can make 6% interest. And I would love you to do a due diligence of us with those 5 steps and see what you come up with. So perhaps we can talk about that later. John, one question to you. You recalled the triple bottom line, you said. You took it off the market and said this is not timely anymore. You wrote a lot about your book, how you would recoin it now, but maybe you can share with us, if it's not the triple bottom line that you had in mind back then, what is now the guideline? Do you have the quintuple or sextuple bottom line that Mariana has just portrayed, or what's the new metrics, the new philosophy you consult by and you would want companies to be managed by? You're unmuted, John. You have to unmute yourself.
For those who don't know, the triple bottom line, I sort of came up with it in 1994, and it had been around for 25 years. And in 2018, through the Harvard Business Review, I did what the HBR editors told me was the first ever product recall of a management concept. I didn't do it because I'd learned to hate the concept. I love it. I genuinely think it's done good work, but I saw more and more people embracing it, but actually embracing a very diluted version of it. The original idea was that it would be integrated across the economic, social, and environmental dimensions of value creation to create integrated solutions. But what people had got to very often was trade-offs. It was siloed thinking brought to bear on this sort of potential for integrated solutions, and people were saying, well, we make a profit, so that's the financial box ticked, and we provide jobs and we provide products and services people want, that's the social box ticked. Shame about the environment. Well, or it might have been shame about human rights or whatever it might be, but that to me was not making no useful progress. And I love the B Corporation movement. Both the last 2 companies I've founded in 1987 and 2008 were the first and second B Corporations in the UK. I love all of that stuff. But I felt that it was time to put a shot across the bows of that whole movement, and to say, are we really, really sure that this is taking us where we want to be? And if we're not, then what? And I have to say that the response, there were 2 responses, 99% people positive. Some of the most extraordinary responses were from business people who had never come across a product recall in their life. They didn't know. They thought a product recall was putting an idea on the spike, killing it. The idea of it, I'd worked with Ford and Toyota and companies like that. Product recall is where something goes wrong in a product. You pull it back and you sort of update, refresh, whatever, the hardware, the software, and then you put it back out into the market. And when I announced the product recall, just very quickly, I didn't have a game plan as to what we would do over the next 2 to 3 years. We launched what we called the Tomorrow's Capitalism Inquiry with the backing of a number of companies and others. And towards the end of that, I did the book, Green Swans. And the argument was there. Nothing wrong with the triple bottom line. It's just that we've applied it within a responsibility framework. Okay. We're all trying to do nice things. We're trying to be more transparent. We're trying to engage all our stakeholders, all that good stuff. But that's actually not changing the system. It's iterating to some degree. The trouble is now we have a resilience problem. Our economies, our societies, our political systems, our biosphere, they're all starting to wobble. And it's no accident. I mean, we've undermined them in so many different ways. And the question is, how do you get resilience in all of those systems? Do you just pray for it? Do you use the language of resilience the whole time? Or do you instead say, we've got to regenerate every single one of those systems, but do it in an integrated way? So just that's where I've got to, in at least my thinking. And regeneration, I think, it doesn't mean that we're saying goodbye to sustainability, all of that good stuff, or the triple bottom line or whatever. It just says that unless and until you're on a regenerative trajectory, you are part of the degenerative order. And that's the message you're sending to your children and your grandchildren, all the rest of it. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'd like to apply that to the net zero idea. It's not enough. There has to be regenerative.
But if we get there, that's a big achievement in itself.
Yeah, that's right. We have already actually reached the limit of the workshop, but I would love to give each one of you one closing remark. It was so great to have you here. I'm so honored, and I think we had a really, really lively and fruitful discussion. Also, between the two of you, I loved it. So one closing remark. Let's start with Mariana, and then John, and then go into a break. Lots of hearts coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, and thank you, John. I really appreciate that. Your last remark, because that's exactly what needs to happen is, and which Tim referred to earlier when he mentioned the word consciousness, and whatever evolution moves on, and we need to move on with it, and a higher understanding as to what's happening, and this having a sense of resilience. And this is a beautiful word. It's just very complex if you want to dive into it and try to understand and apply it, it becomes obvious how complicated it actually is. And so coming in with openness, and this is the 6 P's. So you started with the 3 P, and I ended up with the 6 P's. This is the later stages of consciousness that we need in evolution in order to be able to embrace and address the planetary emergency that we're currently in. So in closing, I am actually extremely grateful, and I'm extremely hopeful. You will see that the last criterion in my book is hope and humility. So we should not pretend that we know what to do, but I am extremely hopeful that we will come up with a solution. Humanity has always come up with a solution once we set our mind to doing it. And we need a sense of humility also. We don't know what it is, but we can be humble and open for the solutions to come. And as long as we join forces, we will be able to address that. And I'm deeply grateful to you, Tim, and your team for doing this kind of conference and for having me. Thank you. We will succeed. I'm very positive about that.
Thank you, Mariana. It's so nice to say. I would coin the triple H. Humble, hopeful, and humorous. John, you have the closing words of the panel.
Well, just very quickly. I mean, Mariana, I would love to know more about what you do. For everyone, my email is john@volans.com. I answer every email. But Mariana, I would love to know more what you do. And one reason for that is we didn't get onto artificial intelligence. And when I think about our future, a lot of people are getting very agitated about AI and its implications. And there will be many unintended consequences. But I still think that AI is absolutely fundamental to making sense of this complex world of ours. And it doesn't mean that it guarantees it. It doesn't mean it's this sort of the silver bullet or whatever. But we've got to augment our capacity to think widely, longer term about complex systems and to some degree complex solutions. So at some stage, one way or another, I'd love to continue that discussion. But again, Tim, immense thanks for making this possible. Great good fortune with the Planet Group's network as it builds momentum, and good luck to us all.
And because you mentioned that, thank you, John, for this. I will get in touch with you. Actually, we've been on calls before. I would like to invite everybody to sign the Asilomar Principles by the Future of Life Institute to make sure that we only will use not harmful AI.
Good. Send us the link via WhatsApp or SMS. I put it in
the Future of Life Institute is easy to find, and sign the Asilomar principles, like the locale in California, Asilomar.
Thanks for calling us out on that. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day, and the others
Thank
see you
you
in 6
all.
minutes.